Welcome. Welcome everyone. Welcome to this launch of the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning Global Partnership. My name's Greg Butler and I'll be the host of this panel and discussion this morning on the topic of New Pedagogies for Deep Learning, if now, then how. The discussion is being held live at the Education World Forum in London and also is being webcast through the Education Fast Forward web channel. We want to welcome you all to this discussion with three global education leaders and thinkers. Before I introduce the panellists this morning, let me remind you all that you can join in the discussion by posting questions and comments to Twitter using the hashtag #NPDL. So for those of you who are tweeters, please join in. We will be monitoring the discussion and including some of your questions for our panellists. The New Pedagogies for Deep Learning Global Partnership brings together education leaders, industry partners, including those in the room, Intel, Microsoft, Promethean, who have supported this initiative, with 1,000 schools in 10 locations around the world. And in the audience today, we have representatives from those 10 clusters of schools, including Australia, Canada, Colombia, Latvia, the Netherlands, Uruguay, USA, and the United Kingdom. So let me start now by introducing our panel. We're excited to have these people with us today. We have Michael Fullan. Michael is the former Dean of the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. Michael is recognised as a worldwide authority on educational reform. He advises policymakers and local leaders around the world in helping to achieve the moral purpose of all children learning. Michael is a prolific award-winning author whose best-selling books have been published in many languages. He is also one of the founding partners of the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning Global Partnership. Next to Michael, we have Andreas Schleicher. Andreas is the Deputy Director for Education and Skills and Special Advisor on Education Policy to OECD's Secretary-General. He provides strategic oversight over OECD's work on the development and utilisation of skills and their social and economic outcomes, including the Programme for International Student Assessment, PISA, and OECD's Teaching and Learning International Survey, TALIS. He has also advised the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning Global Partnership work. And we have Peter Hill next to me. And Dr. Peter Hill has held senior positions in education in Australia, the US and Hong Kong, including Chief Executive of the Victorian Curriculum and Assessment Board, Secretary-General of the Hong Kong Examinations and Assessment Authority, and Chief Executive of the Australian Curriculum Assessment Reporting Authority, ACARA. He is currently a consultant advising on system reform in the areas of curriculum, assessment and certification. Peter is a key advisor on the new measures aspects of the New Pedagogies for Deep Learning work. The aim of the discussion today is to explore the thinking behind New Pedagogies for Deep Learning with a particular focus on the issues of implementation. There's been a lot of talk around system change for many years. What we want to do is talk about what works from an implementation perspective. So moving beyond the talk to the reality. My first question is going to go to Michael Fullan. Michael, would you like to tell us about New Pedagogies for Deep Learning Partnership and the implementation project, and why now?
Okay, we have a session at 4 o'clock today, Michael Barber and several others, about the policy issues, so we need to connect it at that level, but really this panel is on the ground discussion of it. The project itself is got a focus of assembling clusters, 10 clusters of 100 schools, each from 10 different countries, so 1,000 schools that have joined together and are going to, over the next 3 years, pursue the implementation of these ideas. The ideas are, something's different in 2013, 2014. That's never happened in my lifetime, which has been long enough. Not long enough, I want more, but a long time. So this is, the difference is that students and teachers are bored and alienated, is the best way of putting it. We call it the push factor. It's boiling over. It's no longer going to be containable. And at the same time, and happily I think, is that technology and pedagogy is kind of mushrooming in a great way. So that if you take the push factors of boredom, alienation, and the pull factors of new technology and new pedagogy, new ways of learning, you really have a fantastic combination. So I think that's what's happening. We couldn't stop it even if we tried. So instead, we want to be part of it and making it move forward. And what's great about this are two things. One is it is on the ground. This is about action. This is about the doing part. This is not knowledge. It's knowledge and doing, finding themselves together and making things happen. So that's one of two big features. I think the other new feature is it's what we would call whole system action. This is not boutique schools. This is not a sub-project. This is happening on a very large scale. The 1,000 schools are only going to be a pinpoint of the bigger movement, and so what we want to do is interface those schools and the bigger movement and see them gel. So this really is a fantastic year, 2014, where it's coming together, and it will only get more and more powerful.
Thanks, Michael. Andreas, maybe you'd like to add on this, and from your perspective at OECD, and I know you get to see what's happening around the world, and what are the global drivers for change pushing us towards new pedagogies for deep learning?
Well, first of all, my congratulations to the Global Partnership. I think this is such a much needed and important initiative. Important why? I mean, what are the drivers? On the one hand, you can just say education is becoming really the currency of 21st century economies. It's so much more important than it has been in the past. We've recently done not only a PISA for students, but a PISA for adults. So we actually tested workforces, and you can actually see that the connections between skills and economic outcomes, but also things like health, like trust, like civic participation, like political participation. They're all interconnected with skills, and more importantly so. So that's the easy answer. But then you see on the other hand that we have this toxic mix. On the one hand, we have more and more graduates, and many of them end up unemployed on the streets, you know. Actually, one of the countries that has the strongest education system, Japan, had 80% of employers saying they cannot find the people with the skills they need. So there is this growing disconnect between more education and better jobs, better lives. That's sort of, and the answer to this puzzle, you know, why do we have this disconnect, is simply that the kind of things that are easy to teach and easy to test are also easy to digitize, automate, and outsource. When you look at changes in the demand for skills, you can see the steepest decline in demand no longer in the area of routine manual skills. That's what happened in the past, when things got automated. But you can see them now in the area of routine cognitive skills. Again, you know, the things that are just about reproducing what you have learned in school. What matters today is being able to extrapolate from what you know. Use your knowledge in a novel setting. Now, the world economy no longer pays you for what you know. Google knows everything. It pays you for what you can do with what you know, and that makes such an important difference, and that requires these kinds of deep pedagogies. It requires us to really rethink the kind of skills that we value and how we deliver them. I think that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Peter, if you'd like to add on to that, but how will we have to change the way we assess students in order to measure deep learning?
Well, actually a lot, because if we look at our current assessments, they're not doing the job that we need them to do. That's particularly true of testing for accountability purposes, but it also applies to those assessments that we, examinations that we run for certification purposes. Rose Klesham has done a great analysis of items on those, of the tests and the examinations of the leading nations. And they're dominated by items that test relatively low order cognitive skills. And this is understandable. We've been so concerned with issues of reliability that we've gone towards multiple choice or short response questions. And while they can give us high reliability, we suffer when it comes to validity. And now we've got a validity issue with our assessments that we need to address. We need to redress the balance, and that's going to be a tough challenge because the kinds of assessments we need don't fit into a normal testing period and in a paper and pencil environment at all. So we do need to think in a different way. Of course, in the classroom, teachers have long been assessing for deep learning. My teacher certainly did, and I'm sure I tried to, but it was often implicitly and unsystematic. And it was part of a global assessment we were making of students' achievement. Yes, we were very interested in deep learning, but when it comes to using our knowledge of students and making that more explicit, we need more structured kinds of assessment tasks and detailed rubrics that support those tasks. And that is the development challenge that this project in particular will be addressing. I don't think we could solve the problem if it wasn't for the fact that we now have available the capacity to deliver these assessments online in an environment where we can create more authentic kinds of tasks. Hats off to Andreas and PISA for taking a big step in this direction. We all need to move in that direction, and we need to accept this will change our concept of what assessment is. It might not be a once-only event, it might be over time, and we will start to blur the dichotomy that we have now between formative and summative assessment. It's going to change, so big changes ahead. Greg?
So Peter, just to build on that, because I know there's a few people in the room who come from a political domain and you know, they have countries and citizens and constituencies who are interested in it, but will we be able to trust assessments of deep learning and use them in the context of high-stakes certification and accountability?
Trust is a big issue in education, isn't it? That's why we have accountability in the first place. We often feel that we don't have the trust that we need, and the profession doesn't have the trust that it perhaps deserves. And when it comes to assessment, of course, we're particularly concerned that we have reliable assessments. So our challenge is to design environments in which we can assess these harder skills and ensure high levels of inter-rater reliability. This is how we mark them, that we can ensure that they are valid. And I know Andreas has a lot to say about this too, because they're undertaking validity studies of their new assessments of collaborative learning. So we have to do the validity studies to see that what we think we're measuring, we actually are measuring. So that has to be done, because unless we do this, we can have reliable assessments and we know that they are valid, they're measuring what we think they're supposed to be measuring, then we don't do the task. That is our job over the next 3 or 4 years in a R&D context, to build up trust in these assessments, to be able to show and point to an example, here it's working. So we can then start to incrementally bring these kinds of assessments into the mainstream of high-stakes assessment.
Great. So now let's get a little bit to the nitty-gritty, the implementation part. Michael, I'll go back to you if you don't mind. What do you see as the main obstacles to implementing new pedagogies for deep learning, and what are some of the actions to make it work?
I wanted to mention that we're releasing a report on Wednesday affiliated with this project. Maria Langworthy and myself did the report commissioned by Pearson, and it's called A Rich Seam, How the New Pedagogies Find Deep Learning. So we're putting this together, and it's coming a lot from the action we see, so it's not just a conceptual paper. On your question itself, I'd say there are 2 big obstacles. One is, Peter's already mentioned, it's assessment. The other is capacity. So if we take assessment, what's happening in one good way around the world is jurisdictions that have relied on standardized tests are backing away now. There's a small momentum, but it will increase. But they haven't replaced it with the new forms yet. So we're going to have an interregnum where assessments that were no longer valuable recede, and the new ones will take a while to be established. So that's a big challenge, a big obstacle. And the counterpart obstacle is the capacity of teachers, of students really, as learners, their lack of capacity as learners, I want to say, about students, and also leaders. So capacity at every level in terms of these are radically new ways of learning. And that the whole thing is throws the traditional school, makes it a 24-hour proposition, 24/7, and so there's lots of things going on. The good thing about the implementation part is this is happening spontaneously on the ground. so that it's almost organic the way it's popping up, and you can't keep track of it. And what we need to do is kind of harness that, learn from it, pull it together, leverage it forward. So huge obstacles, but inevitable action around those obstacles, which is really going to make it very productive, I think, over the next 2 or 3 years.
So, Michael, are you optimistic or pessimistic that substantial progress will be made in the next 3 to 5 years?
I'm optimistic, I would say, not just in theory. I'm optimistic because I think this is fundamentally about, I know Peter and I talked earlier about it, the evolution of humankind is the only way I can put it. This is about the brain growing in a way that really latches onto this. So it's so seductive, so attractive to humankind. That's what makes me optimistic. And we'll no longer have to worry about how do we implement it from the top. We'll have to worry about how do we harness the forces that are already happening on the ground. And that's an optimistic scenario for those of us who want to see change driven by more intrinsic motivation, by people putting their energies behind it, by affecting each other as they do it.
Fantastic. So you mentioned about we've already seen examples of this. Peter, I'm going to go to you now. Where are we seeing deep learning in action?
Deep learning is alive and well, fortunately, and it's alive and well in schools, and where teachers are sharing their experiences and experiments with each other. The place where I go to see good examples of deep learning in practice is teacher blogs. And they're coming up with all sorts of creative ideas. I saw one recently where a teacher had engaged her whole class working with a live poet in understanding that poet's poetry. And the live poet was a part of the whole experience for those children. And they each got into separate projects investigating this poet's poetry and where it came from. It was a wonderful project. But then I thought, how on earth are you going to assess that? And there's the challenge. So it is alive and well on the blogs. If you want to go to a source where you can see the more formal attempts to get into assessment for deep learning, I would recommend David Conley and Linda Darling-Hammond's book on creating systems of assessment for deep learning. If you go on the Stanford website, you can download a copy of it. It's mercifully short, but highly readable. So there's a good source. So yes, it's alive and well. But we now need to coordinate our efforts to really make progress. I would be optimistic that it can happen at the teacher level as long as we have escaped a lot of the clutter that stops us doing these things. And some of the clutter has been that basically the curriculum has been overloaded with too much stuff. And if you're going to have deep learning, you've got to have the space in which to do it. So that's the one thing, and I think a lot of systems have addressed that, the overcrowded curriculum syndrome. The next thing is they need the encouragement to do this and to have it recognised, because if at the end of the day they're going to go to the objective test and that's going to count for everything, then it's not going to work. So it does depend upon policymakers giving teachers the licence to do this and the encouragement, and as Michael said, it might take some years before there's catch-up at that level. But they've got to be given the licence now, and we've got to have those special sites that are the leaders in the field, that are the pioneers who are taking us to the next generation assessment.
So that's a great lead-in. So we've spoken about this new mode of assessment, or new model of assessment, I guess. Andreas, would you, talking about these changes in implementing assessment, could you share some of your thinking around the new measures we will see and how they might impact learning?
Yeah, in fact, I do believe that a lot of this is already happening. I mean, this is not somewhere in the clouds. There's a lot of really good examples for this already around. And also, one thing I think that is important to me, that this is not about something fuzzy, something that is not related to school subjects. And I mean, this is actually about more rigor in assessments. It's about more coherence. It's about more focus. You know, most assessments that we have today are not particularly rigorous. They're a mile wide and inch deep. You know, you get actually through the surface and you get a high score. Rigor is about cognitive demand. We need to develop assessment tasks that actually get it, learning, deep learning. We need to focus them. Again, you know, the curricular overloaded do a few things well, and we need to make them coherent. And with that I mean coherent from the classroom up to the system level. And I can tell you from my own experience, we've been working on this very hard in PISA. When we assessed reading in the year 2000, you may not believe it or remember it, but in the year 2000, we didn't use a lot of digital devices to read, certainly not in school. So we had a paper and pencil test. When we tested literacy in the year 2009, we did it by using electronic digital literacy. The media had changed. The kind of literacy skills that matter, deep learning, it's about building a mental representation of information you can't see in front of you. Very, very different kind of cognitive abilities. Same in mathematics. Deep learning has a lot to do with mathematics. But it's no longer about recognizing a particular algorithm or formula. It's about being able to use mathematics to model, predict, analyze the world. And it's those kind of metacognitive skills that really matter for success. And I think we're now moving in the area of PISA, everybody sees, if you look at labor demand, the big rises in non-routine interpersonal skills. Your capacity to connect, collaborate, compete. Those are the drivers of sort of increases in wages. Normal assessments don't look at that. Everybody talks about collaborative learning, but at the end of the day, you get your own assessment and you get your own school marks. But actually working on this to have an assessment of collaborative problem-solving skills is just an example of instruments that are being in the pipeline. And by the way, that actually came very much out of the same kind of groups sitting here, putting that together. We're even thinking about something like global competencies now. Today, it matters whether you can relate to other beliefs, value systems and so on. Those things are actually no longer nice to have there. It's critical. It's a part of the critical core. And I think we are at a point where we do have the devices. I mean, there are a few things that I believe matter for success. The first is really coherence, having assessments that extend from the classroom through the school, through the local area, to the system. Not having done anything sort of totally at the local level, but having coherence in there. Thinking about how you can improve learning at every level of the system. This is not just about student learning. It's also about helping teachers to teach better. It's about helping schools to be more effective. It's about advancing systems. I think that's very, very important. Measuring individual student growth. For me, that's sort of the holy grail of all of this. If we can't do that, assessment is always going to be sort of pretty disconnected from this. And then I think Peter alluded to this. It's about having assessments that are largely performance-based, where you actually see what, once again, the world economy no longer pays you for what you know. It pays you for what you can do with what you know. So we need to get at having students actually assessed on their capacity to apply and use knowledge. But again, I actually think the instruments and methods are actually developing fast. The challenge is to connect them to the learning and teaching process. That's where I think the big bottleneck is.
Great. So as I mentioned, we're going to open up to some questions. We have been taking questions from Twitter. If you're on Twitter, you can send us. And in a minute, I might get a runner to work with the microphone from the room as well. The first question we have is to the panel. What's new about deep learning? What's the distinction between 21st century skills and deep learning? Maybe, Michael, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a big question, and it's on the surface, it's not new. That for 25 years, people have talked about 21st century learning skills. What's new about it for us is that it's got more concretization. It's the precision. It's happening on the ground. So this is really. This is one thing that's new. The second thing that's new is it's radically different in a learning mode, the learning partnership that really is about among teachers, among students, and between teachers and students. So fundamentally different learning experiences. The scale of it is new. The fact that now we're talking about it happening spontaneously in every corner of every system. So that's new. Another thing in the Rich Theme paper we identified is the change leadership is new. It's more dynamic. We call it directional vision, letting go, and then reining in. It's much more dynamic learning process and requires leaders who can enable that. And the other thing that's new, and not enough analysis has been done, but we do some of it in this Rich Theme paper, is what I would call the new economies. I once had a throwaway line in a book a couple of years ago that said, "Welcome to this new world where you get twice the learning for half the price." And so it's, I didn't mean it literally, but we're now finding you get twice the learning for the same price, and the cost of education, which has become unsustainable just in financial terms. Now really, you can see that the costs go radically down because students, for one thing, are putting way more effort into their learning because this is what this enables. So a student effort is not, it doesn't cost money. You just have to really make it happen, and then you gain the benefits. So I think the leadership, the economies, the nature of learning, all of that is new in its own right, but it's new on scale.
Any other speakers want to comment on that question, the newness?
Michael's pretty well said it all, but I think two things stand out for me. One is, in the past, we thought it was so important to get basic literacy and numeracy in place, and that's what we've been testing. But now basic literacy doesn't get you very far in the modern world. The jobs that require basic literacy and numeracy are starting to be taken over by machines. And now it's only the higher order cognitive skills that are going to get you forward. So I think there's a huge imperative for us to move quickly to focus on the higher order learning and its assessment. The other big change which has affected us all and which we come across every day is the technology. We can now do it, and that's the enabling factor. So we've got the push and the pull happening here, and so it's that gives me the optimism. I know along the way, however, there will be lots of delays, setbacks, and at times we wonder whether we were silly doing this, where we're trying to bite off too much. But like Michael said, I think this is inevitable. We've got to grasp it, knowing this is going to be difficult. But for future generations, we don't do them any service unless we move forward.
Just a corollary to this. But deep learning is absolutely not new. It has happened always in individual classrooms and schools and lots of good teachers. That's what good teaching is about. What is new is that it's no longer an issue for some, but for all. It's really an issue of making this happen at the system level in a coherent and predictable way. Because it's really something that all people need, not just some.
Next question from Twitter, which I think is a good one. How do students fit into the assessment reform process? Andreas, do you want to lead with that one, maybe?
Yeah, I think this is a great question. We used to think about assessment and learning as two separate worlds. You learn something, and then afterwards somebody comes and assesses you. And the moment it's going to be relevant for the students is when we integrate those worlds. When you actually solve a task as a student and you get immediate feedback as to where your relative strengths and weaknesses are, that assessment and learning are becoming one. And as soon as we are getting there, and I think this is an area where I don't think we are yet far advanced, but as soon as we get there, there's an immediate value for the student because, learning and assessment are becoming one and the same.
Any other comments on this question of student involvement, student participations? Peter, maybe.
I think if you look at PISA results, you'll see that the top nations have pretty well hit a ceiling in terms of performance. Okay, you see statistically significant moves up and down, and some places like Shanghai doing exceptional things. But basically, we've hit a ceiling. And I think the reason we've hit a ceiling is that our model of education is still the old industrial model of age grade progression as they go through. Our big challenge is to put the individual student at the centre of the learning and the assessment. And it's about personalising their learning, and you can only do that through assessment, to establish each individual student's starting points and then move them forward at their pace and as quickly as you can. And in the context of a regular classroom in the past, that has been almost beyond the reach of a teacher to do. They haven't had the tools to do it. And we'll be providing them with the tools so they really can personalise the learning. And that's a great thought. And my thinking is that if we can achieve that, then perhaps we will break through that ceiling in performance, which we very much need to do.
Yeah, just a quick thing. I think on the one hand, we're talking about students being liberated to learn. So that sounds, but then it becomes, if you're not careful, a romantic notion. If only we let freedom happen, that learning would flourish. And it turns out, this is not a criticism, but not all that knowing how to learn does not just come automatically with the opportunity. Yeah, and this gets us back to pedagogy. It's got to be really, and this is a sophisticated part, orchestrated in a way where students are not necessarily self-learners just because they have the opportunity. They're not necessarily good at working in groups unless that is enabled. So this is really where the liberation of learning, which is happening, needs to meet the pedagogy of really having that flourish, and I think that's the exciting part.
Our next question has to do with, I guess, the fact that we're working with 1,000 schools now, but there are more than 1,000 schools in the world, of course. So what are the biggest challenges in scaling the new pedagogies for deep learning work? Michael, do you want to kick off that?
I stopped using the word scaling because it sounds like you do something and then you show it works and then you figure out how to implement it more widely. That's not how this is going to work. A better word is the word we had in the 60s and 70s, diffusion of ideas. Diffusion is a two-way street. So while these 1,000 schools are, and this big enough, they are already themselves linked into thousands of more schools in their localities. So this is, they do this as part of the strategy that they're spreading laterally as we work with this. But then it's happening all other places. So you do have to start somewhere, but I don't have any doubt that this is a worldwide movement that we are plugging into and going to spur, and that the channels of diffusion, which are really the globalization of the exchange of ideas, is really where we can see it work. So I think this is more than a small group. It's a group that's reflective of tens of thousands, millions of schools that will be moving in this direction, and we can plug into that now because of the interaction what is possible with technology, the precision of ideas that will come out of these early attempts.
Andreas?
Yeah, I agree, but I think also making this work in 1,000 schools is a fantastic start. I think that actually doing this in a solid way, I think, is going to move the world forward. This being said, we have to recognize that, at least in the field of education, knowledge is very sticky. Now, there are no inherent incentives in education systems to spread good practice and create networks of innovation. I think this is going to be a formidable challenge, to grow this and to spread this. I think you need to really think very, very hard about how you actually put this in place, because this is exactly one of the biggest weaknesses in education, that good practices rest in the classroom, the rest in the school, the rest in the system. They're not very good in making those successes transparent. And in a way, it comes back to assessment. The moment you can make the successes of the new pedagogies visible so that others can understand, see them, that's the moment this is going to grow. Otherwise, I'm sort of very skeptical.
Do you want to comment there?
Just I'd use the word contagion, because I think that's how new ideas spread in the modern world. They fly around the world in seconds. And as long as Andreas said, as long as they're visible and can be seen in action, then people will adopt them. It is alive and well, but what teachers are lacking now are the tools to do the job in a systematic way and having all the hard work done for them. Right now we're in the R&D stage. We're not in the scale-up stage yet. When it does come, I'm sure it will happen quite naturally.
Great. I'm going to ask one more question from Twitter, and then if there are some questions from the room, we won't be able to take every question, I'm going to say up front, but if people do have a burning question from the room, and they can ask it precisely, so we're not going to, because we're webcasting, it's very hard for people to do speeches from the floor. So if you can ask a concise question, we'll go to the floor. But before we do, the question that I had from Twitter that I think is quite interesting is, what can be done in schools of education to develop teachers to foster deep learning? This area of the new teachers and where they're coming from. Andreas, do you want to make a comment on that?
Well, I think it's a very good question. I think you should make your schools the schools of education. This is where teachers learn. This is where new pedagogies happen. And I think we need to become generally a lot better in integrating sort of the reality in classrooms with teacher education, school education. Some countries are doing this already. You go to Singapore, you go to Finland. In fact, a lot of the teacher education, teacher learning happens in schools. But it's the only way to get that done.
Anyone else? Michael?
Yeah, I think another strand of this work, our work, is the evolution of the teaching profession. It's not just the teacher education, it's the whole profession. And the summit that OECD sponsors every year in March, the International Summit on the Future of the Teaching Profession, is about that. And the teaching profession, the reason that teachers are alienated in a lot of places that we work, partly it's the boredom of students and the way that that's constrained, but it's also the bigger picture, the way teachers are treated. So I think the initial teacher education will fall into place when you make the profession more attractive, a more place to flourish. And that's another part of this. It's not just students flourishing. This is teachers flourishing as learners. And it's a very core part of it. We wrote about it as professional capital of teachers. Their abilities individually, their abilities to work together, their decision-making savvy to solve personalization problems. It's a fundamental part of this puzzle of the new work. And I think schools of education will be forced to be part of this, the more we focus on the entire profession.
If there's any questions from the floor, if you could just put your hand up and we'll bring a microphone to you. But at the moment, then there is one? Okay, there's one at the back there. We'll go there first.
Hello, I'm Rod Bristow from Pearson. One of the challenges with this area of 21st century skills and deep learning is the fear of that people have of moving away from what they trust as the gold standard. Now, we all know about false dichotomies in education, but it is perhaps a valid question to ask, are there some things that we should be doing less of, or is this just another thing in addition to what is currently taught?
Good question. Who would like to say something about that? Michael, maybe.
Just a one-liner. I think the biggest fear is the fear of the status quo. It's not working. That should be really scary, the fact that it persistently not works. And so I think that's another version of fear. And others have talked about making the agenda more focused and more precise.
Yeah. But I also think we should get away from the notion, 21st century skills is something orthogonal to what we do in school. If we make 21st century skills work in mathematics, we've achieved a lot. And there's a lot of the 21st century ideas that you can actually make work in mathematics or science or whatever school subjects. And I think if we approach this, we live in a disciplinary world. Everything is structured in disciplines. We have to be better in connecting those kinds of disciplines and so on. But we shouldn't get rid of that notion. We should make those 21st century skills really work within those areas and then grow them together. And I think that's feasible.
Rod, I think you're absolutely right. Probably one of the biggest obstacles to change is often parents, and because they know what assessment they had and what education they had, and they thought it was pretty good. And so we have a lot of work to do to ensure that those authorities that set the gold standard, like your Oxfords and your Cambridges, they're demanding this sort of assessment. Your top employees, your really big companies are demanding to know this sort of stuff. So I think we've got to bring these people on board with us. The universities, the top universities and the top employers, they've got to be saying with one voice, we need this now.
And I think that's a really important point in this partnership, is that it's not just the people on the panel here, it's a whole group of organisations who are coming together to make this happen, including private sector, governments, non-profits, foundations, etc. So I think that's an exciting part. I'm going to go to the gentleman over here, but I'm going to put a Twitter question in the middle just while the microphone comes to you. The Twitter question is, how will success of the partnership be measured? Anyone like to comment on that from the panel? Michael, maybe.
Yeah, we are, there are twin pillars to the work that, as we describe it, capacity building and assessment of our own work. And so Maria Langworthy is in charge of the latter, and we are busy assembling the expertise on assessment around the world that already is moving forward, and creating our own actual measures that we will use to assess progress on the core goals. We have 8 of them, outcomes, and they're the familiar goals plus character education, citizenship. So they're the critical thinking skills, but they're operationalized, they're precise. So I think this is the The revolution is better assessment, not so much to account for what we're doing, but to be precise about the progress and to stimulate the progress through the measurement. So there's a revolution now, I think, in the nature of assessment. And you've heard the whole panel talk about that. There are new, more coherent, more precise, more elaborate assessments on the skills that we're talking about, the skills that are needed for success in this world, whether it's business or other kinds of forms. These skills are part and parcel of the pedagogy, they're part and parcel of the assessment, and that the revolution in assessment will feed back into the clarity of implementation.
Thank you. I'm going to go to the question now.
Yes, thank you. My name is Mohammed Ghiath from Mohammed bin Rashid Smart Learning Program in United Arab Emirates. Thank you very much for the introduction and the presentation. My question is, in this model that you've been implementing, have you have any space for the parents' engagement, the home engagement with the model, as well as the school leadership, or it's only focused on the school environment itself, being the teachers and the students? And if I may add one more question quickly. In the samples, the 1,000 schools that you've selected, were there any criteria in terms of selection? Why those 1,000 schools and why not others? Thank you.
Great. And who would like to comment on one of those questions, maybe, whether it's the family engagement, beyond the school engagement, or the one around the selection of schools?
Yeah, I'll take the family engagement, because when you look at the strategies that we've embedded in the project and we've written about, they make learning 24/7. If you make learning 24/7, it's hard to avoid parents, right? You can avoid them during the day, but you can't avoid them 24 hours a day. So that's one way of putting it. But the other way of putting it is that we have found that when teachers work in isolation, they see parents as part of the problem. When teachers work together and students work together, they in a sense, they excite the parents. And we've been filming some of this in the school, so we see it in action, where you start with it, it's in the school, but if it's going to work, it becomes, the community and the parents get excited, they become partners. But the teachers and the students have to be good enough to excite their own parents, so to speak. And that's the equation, it's part of this. It's a great part.
Super. On the selection of the schools, does anyone want to comment? Or I'm happy to say that I think probably there are the clusters in the room, or representatives from the clusters. I think that would be a good question to ask them when we mingle in the lobby outside, and you'll get a great answer from them, I'm sure, because they're going through that selection process right now. So we're going to move on, and we are on a timeline here because we're webcasting, and we have an education fast-forward debate following this. So I'm going to ask Michael. Michael, bringing together all these threads, and there's been some really, really good questions here, it seems to me this is more than just about working with 1,000 schools. How would you describe new pedagogies for deep learning in a way that anyone can join the journey?
Well, I think it's already been commented that this work, including our own but others, is transparent. It's accessible to everyone as it happens in real time. And we go out of our way to make it even easier to access the ideas while we're doing it. So I think it'll be easy to interact with our evolution, which is the 1,000 schools plus, let's say, because there'll be many more that are affected laterally. That's one. But I think the equally important part is that in most big successful cases, people have created their own version of the new pathway. They're stimulated by ideas that are working, but if they try to imitate those ideas or adopt programs that other people have had, it always fails. But if they go down their own pathway, they will discover things, and they'll be more embedded in their own work. So I think it's a combination of realizing you have to find your own pathway, but there are good ideas at the beginning and every step of the way that you can draw on. So this will be the work that we see now. It really is under kind of a the world is a fishbowl now, and everybody's in it, and everybody can access it.
Super. Thank you. Well, let's wrap up this panel. The speakers today have painted a picture of how we got here, where we're heading, and why this is critical now. We've also discussed some of the how, and Michael has just made the point on this as a journey. So while we're wrapping up this panel, this is really just the beginning of work that's moving ahead. We hope you feel compelled to find out more about and see how you too can benefit from this work of the new Pedagogies for Deep Learning, about engaging all students and helping them become happy, healthy, confident individuals who flourish and are able to contribute to the common good. I want to thank the speakers today. I want to thank Michael, Andreas and Peter for their contributions. I want to thank you for being here and the discussion we've had, and also those who are on the live stream. Michael and Andreas will continue the discussion when they speak later today. They're talking, as we mentioned earlier, more on the policy issues in sessions later today at the Education World Forum. I also want to thank, for the support in pulling this together, Promethean's Education Fast Forward team. They've been very supportive of us in making this happen, and the Cisco web team for the webcast. I'll recommend that you consider staying here or staying online for the Education Fast Forward debate that follows in just a short while. You can also join in the journey, and please go to the website. It's the URL's on the screen, www.newpedagogies.org, and have a look at what's there. We'll also continue the discussion on Twitter using the hashtag #NPDL. So thank you very much. Hopefully this has been of interest to you, and we look forward to hearing more from you as you consider how this might support your work. Thank you.